Four wise women with different coaching specialties talk about living an empowered, creative, and balanced life.
Welcome, everybody. We are the Take Four Coaches. I'm here with Liz Sumner, Judy Blake, Deb Arthur, and I'm Judy Fine. And today we're going to talk about vulnerability, and Deb is going to kick it off for us.
All right. Well, the first thing I did when preparing for this was to look up the definition of vulnerability. And the definition I found is vulnerability is being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed. So I'd like to add to that it's perception as well, that it's a perception, it's a fear that we might be hurt if we do something. And sometimes that perception's good because we don't want to walk to the edge of a cliff and jump off, but when we're talking about experiences in people, then it's a perception that maybe we need to work with. So I see this in working with vulnerability and understanding in ourselves, that there's phases that we need to go through. And the first one is becoming vulnerable to ourselves. And that means being open-hearted to who we are, our feelings, our emotions, embracing who we are and what we feel, what's going on inside us. And when we can have that open-heartedness to ourselves, now we can be more authentic and stand in who we are. Along with that, we need to create healthy boundaries. So healthy boundaries would be when I think about an experience or something I want to do, is this experience going to be in service to me, loving to me? Is this person going to be something that supports somebody who supports me? And then once we can start doing all that, have the healthy boundaries, a sense of self, it's going to be easier for us to be more vulnerable to the world. So that's kind of basically in a nutshell how I see it.
Yeah, that's a good overview. Do you want to add some thoughts, Judy Blake?
Yeah, that was a great intro. I feel like, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable definitely starts with, it's a personal thing and realizing that, sort of just opening ourselves to whatever emotions we're having. And you've said it was fear and danger or something. But yeah, I mean, certainly right now in particular, there's just such a universal feeling of that around with, just unknown and fear and imminent danger. If we just lock down, we're going to suffer even more. It shows up in all kinds of ways in our bodies and just in the way we snap at each other or whatever. But allowing ourselves to just kind of be with it, be open and present with it. I think the more we can do that, the more we realize also that it can't hurt us the way it feels like maybe it can. Just allowing ourselves to sit and be with these emotions, and it allows us to just be more present and think more clearly about what boundaries we do need to help us, stay safe and feel safe and not feel overly vulnerable to all these things that we can't control.
Yes.
So those are my first thoughts.
How about your first thoughts, Liz?
Those are my first thoughts.
I'm thinking about it because most of the time for me, my unwillingness to be vulnerable is completely imaginary, and I fear making a fool of myself or being shamed. It's not really, I'm not going to be attacked or harmed except by somebody being mean to me, and I always, well, certainly when somebody is being vulnerable to me, I love them for it. My heart goes out when you see somebody being vulnerable. I don't, of course, remember that when it's my turn to let down my walls. And so that's sort of my general feeling about vulnerability. And then these days, because fear of unknown, uncertainty isn't just sort of vague and perceived. I mean, it's there as Judy was saying, there's real danger, but I don't think it warrants being scared all the time. I mean, I don't think that being afraid and collecting evil things that the government has done or not done on the news serves any good purpose. And that's one of the things that I'm looking at these days is when it's useful to have healthy fear, and when that's just making it worse, to collect darkness and misery and reasons that people are. But
it's about the boundaries.
Bringing
Those are the
light
boundaries.
and
yeah,
maybe so. That I want to bring light and optimism to these days. It's yes, we are vulnerable, but I think we will be in more trouble if we let that overtake us.
Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, taking off of what you just said, Liz, you were kind of speaking about, the idea that it's a perceived threat and not an actual physical threat. That's performance anxiety. That's fight or flight. It's a perceived threat. It's not going to kill us, but it might kill how other people look at us, and that, kills us emotionally. Or from a tribal perspective, you're going to get kicked out of the tribe, or no one's going to want to mate with you, and your genes aren't going to continue, or whatever, on a genetic level. I deal with creative people mostly, and creativity without vulnerability is paint on a canvas. It sounds going into your ears. So being vulnerable is an important part of sort of connecting with who you are as an artist, and then putting something out there that other people can connect with. And that the most important thing that when I work with people is to help them understand, and not just mentally, but over time, to really integrate into their bones the idea that you and what you do are not the same thing. You have value. You're not valued by what you do. You have value because you get up on stage and try to sing in front of people. And this is something lots of people don't do. If it's not your favorite performance, it doesn't matter. It doesn't take away from your value because you got up on stage. And other people are in the audience and maybe judging you, because there's a lot of judgments. That's the word. There's a lot of judgment out there, especially.
Oxytocin.
Yeah. I'm continuing. It's my theme from episode to episode. Say words wrong. We're in an era where everything is auto-tuned and auto-brushed and edited and whatever. I mean, even Zoom is doing things to slightly change our get some of the wrinkles out of the way or whatever. It just does it. That's the world we live in, and people can be really horrible to each other, and it feels even more detrimental to be vulnerable. And yet the biggest stars out there, Adele launched her entire career because of one breakup that she wrote an album of songs about, in a very real way. And I mean, there's just instance after instance where I could go into examples. So you have to be vulnerable. And I would say, if you have to be vulnerable, if you really want to connect with people. And the cool thing is, the reason you can connect with people when you're being vulnerable is everybody's the same. Like, I know we like to say, like, I'm unique, and my experience for me is unique because I've never been a person in this time and in this way. So it's unique to me. But as far as like the species go, we all kind of have the same, whatever thoughts you've had, whatever fears you've had, whatever dreams you've had, it's been done a billion times before. Whatever bullshit stories you've told yourself, it's been done a billion times before. So if you can put some of that realness into any of your arts or anything you do, there are going to be people who are like, oh my God, I totally feel that. But if you're putting up walls and trying to put this perfect, vision of you out there, then people can't really connect with you. So that's
Well
like
said.
thank you. That's like one of the tool that I try to work with people on. I'm curious what you guys, we can go back in the same order, I guess, and start with you, Deb. When you're working specifically with someone that you think would benefit from allowing themselves to be more vulnerable, what do you do with that person?
Okay. Well, when I work with people, I always start with having people trust themselves again and trust who they are and find that wholeness inside themselves, because you need to feel grounded inside yourself in order to go out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but the other thing I want to add to this is that sometimes we don't make these choices to go out and show ourselves to the world because we're afraid of how people are going to treat us. Sorry, I lost my thing because I move my hands a lot.
That's dynamic Deb.
Well, that's dynamic. I'm very vulnerable. I'm going to be who I am. I have gray hair, and that's okay. So
and we love you.
But one thing that I did want to say about vulnerability or about putting ourselves out there, that there generally is a fear that stops us, right? Because we're afraid that somebody's going to say, oh, that's terrible, or you did a really bad job. And one thing that's really important, I think, a shift that we need to all make is to see any feedback we get as an opportunity. Mm-hmm. So if somebody says, wow, what you just did was awful, and that makes me feel bad, I need to go inside and go, what are they triggering inside me? Because truthfully, nobody can make you vulnerable unless you let them. And we're not talking about physical harm. I'm talking about emotional, energetic. So if I go into a situation and I get criticized, I need to look at why that bothers me. I mean, of course, nobody wants to be criticized. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say we're going to become these like walled off people or whatever, but why is it that if this person says something to me and that bothers me, I need to use that as an opportunity to figure out what's getting triggered inside me. And then as we heal those, it's going to be easier and easier for us to put ourselves out there.
Yes, that's a good point. Mm-hmm. How about you, Judy Blake, when you're working with clients?
Well, there's just a bunch of things that have been coming up just listening to you guys. One is that this isn't directly answering that, but I will. Sure. I think I will.
Say whatever you want to say.
There's the emotional vulnerability, and there's mental vulnerability, and there's physical vulnerability. So there are different aspects to look at, and I think when I was listening to you, Liz, the one thing that came up at one point was just that if we, when we hear somebody else just being, when we bear witness to or listen to or whatever, somebody else being very emotionally vulnerable, just like you're talking about, Judy, also, with performing, when it's honest, real vulnerability and not something contrived, there's hardly anybody that doesn't respond to that, because mm-hmm. It's such a heart, it's just from the heart. So I always, anyway, I guess I just wanted to say that. But when I work with clients, because I do work with so many people that have been through really tough stuff and losses, and they've had a lot of grief or whatever, they come to me usually feeling so vulnerable in every way. So it is about, the work that I do with it is around helping them, being okay, allowing that, but also creating, just like you were talking about, Deb, and, just creating some boundaries around that, because they're so vulnerable that, it feels like the whole world's attacking you when you're in that kind of place, when you're so wide open to everything and in so much pain. So it's about, being able to sit with the pain, realizing, the pain or whatever difficult emotion comes of vulnerability is in and of itself, it can't kill you, right? It doesn't, the experience is difficult, but it can't actually cause you harm in a physical way. So if we can just love ourselves for it, and, you know, allow that to be okay. And then also creates a little bit of structure around our days so that we don't stay just immersed in such a raw, vulnerable place all the time. Because then that, you know, starts having us feeling like we just can't move forward in any way. So.
Yes, good point. What about you, Liz?
Yeah, I agree completely. And when I work with clients, particularly around procrastination or not doing the things that they said they were going to do, the first thing we talk about is forgiveness. That it's you have to allow yourself to make mistakes and not do things perfectly, and move on, and not just beat yourself up over that, and let that take away any sense of accomplishment that you have. And, oh, well, I blew it that one time, so therefore I'm never going to be any good at blah blah blah, so I might as well not even try. And it's just little baby steps of forgiveness, and eventually you get to be able to, as Deb was saying, that to let go of it, and examine what is it about what this person has said, rather than say, oh my God, they're right, I will never show my face again. So forgiveness is number one.
That's a good point. And that's interesting because that's just reminding me that there have been times I felt that, when I look back, obviously, when I'm brilliant and looking back, I have felt like I didn't let myself be vulnerable with myself. I didn't let myself say to myself, I need help, or, you know, this is killing me, or something like that. I mean, a perfect example is I bring this up all the time, but I had a pop music school during the housing crash, and I just put blinders on and tried to power through it. And it wasn't until like somewhere in year three, when I kind of lifted my head up and looked around, and I was having like 2 or 3 migraines a week, and I had gained weight, and people were telling me I didn't look, you know, I'd walk in the room and they'd be like, oh, are you sick? And I wasn't. And, I was just a mess. And I realized somewhere in that period of time that I was acting like a person with an alcoholic in the family who's trying to convince everybody out there there's no alcoholism here. You know what I mean? And I was spending all my time like putting this facade up, and then like a brick would fall and I have to fix, and then brick fix that, and whatever. And because I wasn't being vulnerable even to myself or to anybody else, it was all, you know, just smoke and mirrors. But because I wasn't doing that, all my energy was going into fixing the wall constantly, and I wasn't coming up with solutions, and I wasn't asking for help, and I wasn't doing all these things. I can't say now that they would have made a difference, but they certainly would have made a difference with my mental health. So we have to be vulnerable. We have to be willing to be vulnerable with ourselves and say, like, I can't do this myself, I need help, or I have to change this, or something.
Or I have to understand where this belief system I'm living in is coming from, because this is no longer serving me. So why does it still live inside me? What are the roots of it? Why do I hold on to it today? That's part of the being vulnerable with self that you're talking about, Judy. Absolutely. It's like we have to understand why we're where we are. And if we only look outside ourselves, then we're not going to find that answer. I mean, we can have resources outside us, like coaches, that can help us to find these answers, but the truth is really within us. And it's about finding that and being vulnerable to that first.
And you're right, because that was an ingrained thing in me, that I had to do everything myself, and there wasn't somebody there to help me. And that's definitely something that fueled that.
Right.
Does anybody else have another like story or instance where they had to learn to let themselves be vulnerable?
Well, I can say, just as a performer and singer, I mean, there's probably a lot of instances I could come up with about that, but certainly as a performer, when I have been, you know, when I get up there and somehow, especially some big concert that I've really psyched myself out for. I mean, by big, I don't mean like, you know, stadium size, but big for me. And, you know, I'm I'm, in this sort of lockdown, like, okay, this is going to be really good. I'm going to do really good. This is going to be great. No, everything will be okay.
God damn it.
I'm cast sort of outside myself.
Yes.
And then I suck. You know what I mean? It just, like, the quality of my performance goes down. And that's something that I really had to learn. And once in a while when I'm pretty good at just sort of staying, because the thing is, when we're vulnerable, we're also very present.
Absolutely.
We're right here instead of here, 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 and here, and here. And right here is where, like, truth lies, and, honesty and answers, and understanding. And the more we don't allow ourselves to reside there, the more we cut ourselves off from authentic everything, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we scatter our energy outside of us. That's a very much a sports psych concept that you're talking about too. Like, I can remember, this is not about coaching, but I can remember being an athlete and rowing in my single on the Charles River. And I saw this other boat, and she was starting to catch me. And all I did was I focused all my energy on, oh no, oh no, oh no, as I watched her walk by me, or that's what we called it, rowing by me. And so what I learned from that was I have to keep my energy in myself and in my boat, because otherwise it just went all over the place.
I remember doing that as a kid once. There was a mud, I was on my bike and there was a mud puddle, but there was like raised ground. Oh, no hands in the mirror. There was like, that's a camera, not a mirror. But anyway, there was raised ground in the middle, and I was going to ride through it. I could see all these other bike tracks that went right through it. And the whole time I was like, oh my God, I'm going to fall. Oh my God, I'm going to fall. And of course I fell. Whereas if I just been, okay, stay straight, it probably would have been fine. So yeah, that's very true.
Staying grounded in ourselves is the key for sure.
I could tell also when I'm with musicians that I don't really feel comfortable and safe with, which would be the last band I was in. And musicians who are my friends, I'm just a better singer.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt about it.
But that's one of those healthy boundaries we're talking about. That situation did not feel right to you. It did not serve you. There's your answers. So
you weren't safe to be, you didn't feel safe enough to be vulnerable, and just,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Any more thoughts from you, Liz? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Just haven't heard from Liz in a little bit.
Go for it, Liz.
You're on the spot.
Well, I have never, because I have never made a mistake, I'm fascinated by the stories that you're telling.
It's a service we provide for people.
It must be terrible.
I did want to bring up, I don't want you to interrupt, but the concept of safety, I think, is really important. That concept of safety is super important. And what's interesting is I had an experience with a client, which of course I'm not going to go into great detail on, but after working with her for several months, it dawned on me in something she said, that she didn't feel safe. She didn't know what it felt like in her body to be safe. So we talk about feeling safe and feeling, but if you don't have that foundation of knowing what it feels like to be safe, or happy or joyful, like if you're not tuned into that, then you can't develop the healthy boundaries. So that's just, I think the four of us kind of have a sense of safety, but not everybody feels that. And it was a real eye opener, like, oh, you don't feel safe. You need to, we need to work with how do you feel that.
Yeah, that's very true.
Living in situations in war-torn countries and homes that aren't safe, like people that they cannot afford to be vulnerable. You know what I mean? They have to, like, just like you were saying, Judy, they've got to be putting the bricks up constantly all the time. And that's heartbreaking, Yeah.
Were you going to say something, Liz?
Yeah, I had a good teacher back in the 80s to learn about vulnerability, and the idea of saying, boy, I feel really shy here, I don't know, that if you admit to the feeling, the vulnerability, if you put it right out there, it just draws people to you. It is just so you feel the love instantly
Mm-hmm.
as soon as you admit your own vulnerability.
Absolutely. I find myself trying to do that for my students. Trying, like, I can tell that you just met me and I'm asking you to sing a song because it's a consultation. And so I'll say, I get it. You don't know me. I'm a complete stranger, but just, just to get them to laugh about being scared helps a lot. Doesn't fix it all, but it helps a lot.
It's like naming the elephant in the room.
Yeah,
Makes
it
everybody
is.
go, oh, okay, yeah.
But you
It's
still
all
have
out
to
on the
sing.
table. Yeah.
So this is good stuff. Do we want to sum it up? I don't think Liz took notes this time. I think we're on
No,
our
I
own.
didn't. I was fascinated.
Sure.
Do you want to sum it up, Deb?
Okay.
We can
I
each
didn't
sum
take-
up our own thing and leave everybody with a final thought. That works.
Well, that my take on is vulnerability is a perception, like fear is a perception, that we need to come within and do our own healing first, develop our healthy boundaries and know what those are for each of us. And then it's much easier to be open-hearted and out there in the world. And when somebody when we do feel like we're being attacked by somebody, let's take that experience, understand what it's igniting within us and heal that part of us. Because if you don't have the button, it can't be ignited. So
yes, good points. Do you want to sum up, Judy Blake?
I guess what's coming to me is, I see vulnerability actually as a strength. It's not a weakness. A lot of people feel like if I'm too vulnerable, then I'm showing my weakness. But I think it's, actually, giving ourselves permission to be vulnerable is an empowering thing.
Yes.
And I just wanted, this might be something we can talk about in the future, but it keeps coming to my mind when I'm listening to you, Deb, is I don't know if you guys have ever read the 4 Agreements, but it's, the one about not taking anything personally. It might be, those are really interesting concepts to think about. And the personally one comes up so much for me with vulnerability, because
absolutely.
we feel vulnerable to everybody else's opinions, but do they really have anything to do with us? So
exactly.
that's sort of a forward thinking thought that I just was bubbling up.
How about you, Liz?
I don't think I have anything more than what y'all have said. It's a good conversation to have.
I think so too. I'll just add that I'll reiterate that if you're struggling to be vulnerable, it's possible that you're still associating what you do with your value instead of just who you are. And that the more that you can remember that you're valuable just because of who you are, the things that you do become just this succession of learning processes along the road. You can write your first novel and send 10 queries out to agents or something and get 10 rejections back. And that's not failure. That's you sent your first query out and you had your first experience and you wrote a freaking novel. So as long as you're not equating your value with whether or not that one book gets picked up in the first 10 queries, then you can remember that this is just part of your process and that you're still a valuable person.
Right.
Nice.
Yay. Good talk, ladies.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
All right.